Sanctions against cryptocurrency may follow, but most Russians aren't bothered. The Russian economy and currency are falling to new lows due to Moscow's war against Ukraine, and Washington is trying out a new method to ratchet up the pressure on Putin. Sanctions targeting cryptocurrencies including Bitcoin and Ethereum. A new task force to enforce sanctions was announced by the Department of Justice on Wednesday. The proposed action will target efforts to use cryptocurrency to evade U.S. sanctions, launder proceeds of foreign corruption, and evade U.S. responses to Russian military aggression. It comes at the same time as the U.S. and its allies, including the infamously neutral Switzerland, are taking heavy measures against Moscow. Known as digital tokens, they are not owned or issued by a central authority such as a bank, so the Kremlin, as well as other ancillary actors that support the offensive on Ukraine, can evade sanctions. Bitcoin, like most cryptocurrencies, is decentralized and borderless, which means that it doesn't respect national boundaries. Because there is no central authority to block transactions, digital currencies are also resistant. Since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, stats from crypto data provider Keiko show that transactions on centralized Bitcoin exchanges in both the Russian ruble and the Ukrainian hryvnia have surged to their highest levels in months. This is likely part of the reason why Ukraine asked all the top crypto exchanges to ban Russian users, a request that has been rejected by many major players, who argue a move like that would go against the very reason why cryptocurrencies exist. Despite growing signs of crypto adoption, as well as dialed-up rhetoric from world leaders about banning sanctioned Russians from digital currency exchanges, crypto as a pathway to sidestepping sanctions isn't really a viable option at scale. First of all, crypto markets offer thin liquidity and token transactions are, by design, traceable via a public ledger known as the blockchain. Aside from that, experts tell CNBC that ultimately there are better and smarter ways than using Bitcoin to get around global financial blockades. The size and scale of crypto markets, and their state of liquidity, is not sufficient enough to offset what happens from banking disruptions and other disruptions from sanctions, said Yaya Fantasy, a fellow at the Center for a New American Security who assesses national security and money laundering risks related to digital assets. It's akin to, if someone were to block your paycheck for a month and then you had to rely on your piggy bank to make up for it, he said. Russia is no stranger to sanctions. Russia is no stranger to sanctions, and its political class has spent years getting creative on workarounds. Moscow faced international condemnation in 2014 after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. That was also the year that a passenger plane headed from the Netherlands to Malaysia was shot down by a Russian-made surface-to-air missile, fired over territory held by pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. Since then, President Vladimir Putin has built buffers to insulate Russia from the blowback of Western sanctions, which economists estimate has cost Russia $50 billion a year. Typically, the way sanctions work is that a government generates a list of the individuals and companies that must be avoided, and those doing business with these banned entities are subject to heavy fines. But sanctions are only as good as the KYC, Know Your Customer, onboarding requirements, explained Sarah Beth Felix, an authority on anti-money laundering and sanctions compliance. Depending on how strict that is, then that drives the data, which drives whether or not the sanctions are actually effective, Felix says. That is agnostic when it comes to the underlying flow of funds, whether it be crypto, fiat, wires, payable through accounts. It all lives or dies on the underlying data that's captured and verified on the ownership of the company, the individual, and all that kind of stuff. Part of Putin's strategy involved diversifying away from U.S. treasuries and the U.S. dollar, cultivating a new kind of debt structure largely based on euros and gold. Putin's war chest includes $630 billion in foreign reserves, which serves as a sort of financial shield meant to dull the impact of sweeping sanctions. The country's underlying financial fundamentals have also helped to absorb the shock. CNBC has reported that Russia has a debt-to-GDP ratio of only 18%, a current account surplus, and the price of oil surging past $113 a barrel, its highest level in more than a decade, is certainly a boon. Thus far, the White House has steered clear of sanctioning Russian oil sales. Moreover, experts tell CNBC that Russians have been bracing for this kind of crackdown for months. Russia's elite and financial authorities have been preparing for sanctions for some time, said Salman Baniai, head of public policy for North American for Chainalysis, which specializes in tracking activity on blockchain networks. Any movement of funds likely happened prior to Russia's invasion, Felix agreed. I would assume billions and billions of dollars already moved through these front companies and shell corporations that we have around the world, that are owned by Russian businesses and individuals, regardless of whether it involved crypto or normal bank-to-bank wires, said Felix. Benii agrees that it is unlikely that designated persons would opt to move around large quantities of crypto at this point. Instead, Benii says that if cryptocurrency is being used to evade sanctions, it likely would have happened slowly, over the past several months. At the end of all of this, the glaring, massive gap that we have is in the transparency of who owns what companies, not just in the US, but around the world, explained Felix. Most of the volume on FTX comes from institutional liquidity, says FTX US president. In any case, Bitcoin wouldn't work. The Russian economy is too large, the crypto market is too small, and any huge transactions would likely be flagged. Even if Russia were to use crypto to evade sanctions, its economy is too large and the crypto market is too small. Fantasy pointed out that crypto markets are small in comparison to banking sector activity. There have been new loan and equity restrictions placed on some of Russia's most important state-owned companies with assets estimated at nearly $1.4 trillion. A key source of capital will be unavailable to these entities in the US. The market capitalization of cryptocurrencies is around $1.9 trillion. Furthermore, cryptocurrency is thinly traded, which means that digital tokens like Bitcoin can be hard to buy in large quantities. Binance, the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchange, allows a maximum trade order of about $250,000 on the Bitcoin-ruble pair, compared to a maximum trade order of about $2.6 million for the Bitcoin-dollar pairing. In an interview with CNBC, Delstun told the network that the transactions the Russian government would need to conduct would be many times larger than anything that Russian citizens would be doing on their own in the present. The transaction would be extremely difficult due to liquidity limitations, but it could also be red flagged entirely. Using the blockchain, a transaction size is immediately available, making it evident to anyone looking that large transactions aren't as anonymous as they are often made out to be. Delstun added that cryptocurrencies aren't so anonymous as they are often made out to be. Compared to wire transfers from bank to bank, which are heavily monitored to ensure sanctions compliance, each cryptocurrency transfer is captured on a public, permanent, and immutable blockchain ledger and can be traced in nanoseconds. Felix explained that when I hand you a $5 bill, you cannot trace it back to me. Yet if I transfer you money through my wallet, it will always link back to the wallet ID, which has all of my customer identification data if the exchange is regulated. As Chainalysis Benii explains, a single tip in the cryptocurrency market can expose a network of wallet addresses involved in ransomware fraud and money laundering within hours, whereas a tip relating to a traditional wire transfer could take many months to yield the same level of visibility into a criminal network and its money laundering. Monero, Dash, and Scash are privacy tokens with additional anonymity built into them. However, they are not as liquid as other tokens since many regulated exchanges have chosen not to list them due to regulatory concerns. Additionally, there is the question of what to do once you have the crypto. Delstun tells CNBC that cryptocurrency isn't widely accepted for major purchases, such as electronics, food exports, or spare parts, which are all things a nation like Russia needs, as it doesn't manufacture them. In fact, Fantasy notes that compliance with the global sanctions regime has historically been lacking, but has been improving as these platforms increase their internal compliance teams. Federal prosecutors are stepping up their crypto enforcement duties too, as well. In February, the U.S. Justice Department introduced a new cryptocurrency enforcement team. Could we have a digital ruble instead? In addition to the possibility of Bitcoin facilitating sanctions evasion, Fantasy believes that central bank-backed digital currencies, or CBDCs, are the bigger story. In October 2020, the Bank of Russia released a consultation paper on a digital ruble, and Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabiullina said the country plans to prototype and pilot the digital currency this year. It is described as a digital version of the country's national currency that would use a distributed ledger technology similar to that used in China's digital yuan and would be controlled centrally by the Bank of Russia. According to the Moscow newspaper, when it was first announced, The digital ruble would reduce the country's dependence on the dollar as well as mitigate the effect of sanctions. Former Treasury official Michael Greenwald told CNBC long before the Russian invasion of Ukraine that a digital ruble could be problematic for the United States. He said that if Russia, China, and Iran create their own central bank digital currencies to operate outside the dollar and other countries follow them, that would be alarming.